Okay, well, I think it's right on the hour, so we should get started. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today, and welcome to the first International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. Today, I hope wherever you are, you're having some, clear blue skies. But of course, this is not how we often experience life, particularly in Asia. Many cities have significantly degraded air quality, and although we've seen some improvements in air quality issues during the COVID-19 lockdowns, the challenge, of course, is for us to, address longer-term air quality issues that are certainly an important driver of public health issues across the region. Now, today with this event, we are coming together to emphasize the need to make further efforts to improve air quality and to protect human health around the world, and importantly for us across Asia and Pacific. This is a UN initiative to launch this first inaugural day, Clean Air for Blue Skies, and we're very pleased to be working today with the UN Environment Programme, WHO, and IGES, as well as other partners to bring this event on. This is also for ADB a first webinar as part of a series of webinars that are intended to bring more attention to issues around air quality and looking at clean air for a happy, healthy and prosperous society. So I do hope that you will enjoy this session and get a lot out of it. Very pleased to kick us off by just briefly introducing our speakers and panelists today. We are very fortunate that ADB's Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, Mr. Bambang Susantono, has agreed to join us today and will shortly provide us with some opening remarks to set the scene and provide some of the context on the air quality issues that we're facing across the region. We're also very fortunate to have 4 very esteemed speakers, and I'd like to just briefly introduce you to them now, and following Mr. Susantono's presentation, they'll be joining us for a panel discussion. The first is Dr. Marco Mattuzzi. He is the head of the Asia Pacific Center for Environment and Health at the WHO, the World Health Organization, and he's based in their regional office for the Western Pacific. He is an epidemiologist and has significant experience in environment and occupational health studies, and he's currently working looking at the impacts of climate change and environmental risk factors on health and health equity, with a view to addressing these pressing challenges across the Anthropocene. Second, we have Dr. Nandakumar Janardhanan. He is a research manager for Climate and Energy Division and also the regional coordinator for South Asia research operations with the Institute for Global Environmental Studies, IGES, based in Japan. He specializes in climate and energy policy and also has a strong interest in air pollution, climate policy, renewable energy, nuclear power, and other technology solutions for low carbon development. Third is...
want to raise public awareness, want to demonstrate further the pollution. Hospital admission, restricted activity days. I mean, the list is very long, and it concurs to making this the burden of disease extremely large, whatever known or measured. When it comes to costs, it's WHO has less systematic data on those. I mean, our main effort goes into mapping out the impacts on. However, there are several assessments and studies and pieces of information which indicate that the costs are very, very large. I used to work in the European region before moving to Asia, and we did a study, for example, in Europe, which showed that the impact of air pollution through the cost of health impact of air pollution is really, really large. It can reach double-digit figures of percentages of national GDPs in places where GDP is where air pollution is high, and so it's staggeringly high figures, sometimes difficult to handle, and it's kind of when these figures come from willingness to pay studies, which I think goes with what we saw earlier in the data that your VP showed on the degree of concern that people have for air pollution. And indeed, when those willingness to pay studies are done, and it have been done over and over again by many OECD and various banks, and they consistently show massive costs. Also very large, but not as large, are the cost of illness studies, those that estimate really the cost on the health services and on jobs. So we're always talking of billions, sometimes trillions of dollars, and that's I think it's a consistent picture with the size of the health impact. So yes, it can be done. There's many figures that indicate a very, very large, not only health, but also economic impact. Over.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mattuzzi. And, it's staggering, really in terms of those figures that you've outlined, proportion of GDP going, sometimes higher than 10% in double figures, as you said. And the billions to trillions of dollars in terms of health impacts and of course economic impacts as well. It clearly is an issue that we need to pay more attention to, obviously, and the linkage is also there with COVID-19. So thank you for that intervention as well. Let me continue on and pass now to Dr. Janardhan Hannan from IGES. Dr. Janardhan Hannan, can you give me a little bit more perspective also on some of the, the recent global trends? Is this something that's getting better or worse? And how does Asia sit in comparison to other regions?
Bruce, this is quite an interesting question. And first of all, let me thank Bruce and your colleagues and Vice President Susantino for taking this initiative and also giving us this wonderful opportunity. Now, with regard to your question about the Asia and air pollution issues, it's interesting to note that some of the highest recorded levels of air pollution are in the Asia Pacific region and the countries there. Interestingly, less than 8% of the population of this region only have access to healthy air as per the WHO standards. That means that around 4 billion people, the other 92% of the population in the South and Southeast Asia are exposed to levels of air pollution that pose significant risk to their health. Air pollution in Asia and Pacific is, it's not just a health risk issue. It also has damaging impacts on the environment as well as agriculture. So these impacts have significant economic consequences, affecting the overall economic growth as well as welfare of the people in this region. If the current policies aimed at limiting emissions are effectively enforced, then we believe that by 2030, we'll be able to the air pollution levels will still remain at 2015 levels, but still leaving about 4 billion people exposed to health damaging levels of air pollution. But one interesting point here is that there's an additional 650,000 people in the region could enjoy clean air by 2030 if a package of 25 clean air measures are implemented with immediate effect. I'm referring to one of the reports which UNEP has prepared. It titled Air Pollution in Asia and the Pacific, Science-Based Solutions, in which IGES also had an opportunity to collaborate and work with. Thank you. Over, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's clear. And I've seen the UNEP report, and I just there. It's really an excellent guide in terms of those 25 measures, and it's something actually we can share through this meeting as well. We can drop in the chat box later because it really is an important guide, and it shows also, tackling air quality is not just one thing. It really needs to be, cross-sectoral and integrated, and also the linkages with climate change is obviously very, very clear as well. So let me now turn back to Bert from UN Environment Program. But there are many sources of air pollution in Asia. Things like burning crop residue, increasing number of fossil fuel vehicles, industries, etc. What do you think are some of the most important, and what needs to be addressed earlier or sooner as part of a strategic approach to addressing air quality issues?
Thank you very much, Bruce. I think that question, what is the most important, depends on which source.
But yeah, let me rephrase. Before coming to that topic, let's start a little bit more contextual. So, VP in his opening remarks talked about the World Happiness Report, and found that people were less happy in areas with higher concentration of particulate matter. Can you give us a little bit more information on this? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thanks again. This World Happiness Report is very interesting. I think we all need to take a look at it, realizing that happiness can be very subjective. It depends on various contexts. But the authors did try to look into it, and they did relate. There are questions, for example, like your closeness to public open space, parks, rivers. How does this affect your happiness? Of course, air quality and noise levels questions are also there. And they've also found and identified, as highlighted in the presentation, the increased air pollution levels, particularly PM10 and PM2.5, leads to decreased happiness. But overall, I think if you look at it, it's also because people don't go out that much. Like people cannot, they will choose to just stay indoors because of high levels of air pollution. And if they do so go outside, they will be wearing masks. If you look at children, UNICEF also early this year published a study on happiness, like happiness of children. And they found that the children are happiest when they are able to play outside. So again, this correlation between enjoying the outdoors, of course, decreased levels of air pollution leads to a higher, better quality of life. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Bert, for your inputs there. And, I agree, having spent about 5 months with my children in a lockdown situation where they were pretty much confined to their home, I can certainly agree that children are happiest when they're able to play outside. I think that's something, we've all experienced some shifts recently with the COVID situation in terms of how we, put into perspective these issues. Now, I want to move on to another round of questions and focusing, a little bit more in terms of the challenges. I'd like to go back to Dr. Mattuzzi. Dr. Mattuzzi from WHO, we learned earlier in the session and from Vice President Susantano's presentation that there are 7 million deaths caused every year by air pollution. And air quality continues to really get worse. So obviously this issue is not getting enough attention. Why do you think this is so?
Right. Well, this is really the question, well, certainly one of the main questions in the field. We have this enormous evidence beyond any reasonable doubt. The impacts are quantified and very large and very costly. Yet a response, well, I mean, there is, one has to be fair, there is quite a high level of response and high level of concern, but the situation is not improving as fast as one would hope or even expect. And there might be several reasons. One is that it's really a complicated issue in many settings. I mean, we mentioned, we will probably talking about the sources of air pollution, and they are very many and different, and that involve they involve economic development. So it's not something you change overnight, for sure. There's also the issue air pollution is has less of the characteristics that other risk factors have in terms of being a reason of alarm. It's not a catastrophic event. It's not. It's everybody's problem. There are no special subgroups. I mean, we know that there are vulnerable populations, but it doesn't have this type of hidden properties. I mean, we know it's everybody's problem, and the effects are the biggest portion of the health impacts are long term. Most of the figures, the 7 million type figures of extra deaths, come from long-term effects. So the urgency is maybe not as easily perceived as it is for other risk factors like outbreaks of infectious diseases, for naming one. So I mean, there's an issue of we've been working for many years now on issues of risk perception, communication, and try to identify the most effective responses, but it remains a gap. There remains a disconnect between the degree of evidence, the size of the impact, and the level of air pollution that many societies worldwide seem to be tolerating one way or another. So we really have to scale up this kind of connection, and that's why a day like this, I think, goes in the right direction. We try to put more pressure on this issue, including on raising the profile, the level of perception that we want everybody to be more aware of, from general public to governments to interest groups and to all sectors, and not only health and environment, but beyond that, because many other sectors really influence emissions and therefore concentrations, both indoor and outdoor air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mattuzzi. So yeah, I mean, you really point to the complexity of the issue, and I guess in some ways it's typical of issues related to common goods. We all contribute to the decline in air quality, in general. It's hard to pinpoint it down to one particular source. Plus, the fact that long term you see these increases in mortality and morbidity, but of course it's not as obvious as say the infectious disease that we're facing now with COVID-19, where we're having a significant number of worldwide deaths in a short space of time. Still much less than we see in air quality annually, but it's a longer term killer, so obviously it's harder to point the issue. So obviously presenting the data is going to be a critical issue, and what the scientific data tells us in terms of what we need to do to make good policy decisions. And I'd like to turn back to IGES there, to Dr. Janardhan Hannan, to provide us with a few more thoughts in terms of how do we take the best data available and turn that into good policy reforms and support the government for things that they can really pick up and make a change on.
Thank you, Bruce. Now, the data with regard to air pollution and how the decisions can be made, effective decision can be made, this is a sort of a pertinent question. Governments already collect a large amount of administrative data for reporting and complaints purpose. But when it comes to air pollution, which is sort of a specialized field, one of the biggest issues the governments face is about the staffing, adequate staffing to handle this data, and those staff that require an understanding of public policy and also need technical skill to manage and analyze data. And finally, communicate these data summaries to the policymakers for helping them decide on adequate policies. Data availability also is one of the biggest issues. Outdated technology can make it difficult for governments to extract their data in a usable format. And when computer systems are controlled by agencies, which is actually not the government, and then communicating with those agencies about data handling and all, that also can actually be one of the biggest challenges. Having said that, we have to understand here that good data does not always mean good policy. It needs to be processed in a format that is consumable by the government and should be sort of be able to use in that format. Another point here is that air pollution as an issue, it's a public policy issue. And the data is not solely available with the government. Multiple stakeholders are involved in this. General public, health sector, civil society, policymakers, industry, all are actually party to it. So it is sort of a Herculean task for any government to make policies compiling all these data, which is often available in inconsistent or unconsumable formats. So it's sort of an important step for the governments to make sure that the nexus between these institutions or these actors and stakeholders in the society work well. And here also, one of the important points I would like to highlight here is that, as we talk in the climate negotiation point of view, CBDR applies here also. For countries, different societies, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities are some sort of a point which we also should understand, because some of the societies, some of the governments may have adequate capacity to process data and convert that into effective policy measures, but some of the other governments may not have. This is exactly one of the places where institutions like ADB plays a major role in connecting these policy mechanism, policy making institutions with the real issues on the ground. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much for that, and great points. Obviously, the being able to collect the data, synthesize it, analyze it, and then turn that into effective policy action is challenging, given the multi-sectoral nature here, and it's certainly an area where capacity support for key governments facing these challenges is obviously necessary, as well as transition of technologies that would be needed in certain cases to move over. So I really appreciate those points. Let me now pass again to Bert Fabian from UN Environment Programme. Bert, I jumped ahead before and I have to apologise. So the next question that I wanted to ask you was about solutions. What are the pressing issues, and what would be some of the ones that we need to start tackling first? Let me come back to that question and ask you again for your views on that.
Yes, thanks again, Bruce. Well, the answer to this question is, or should be, based on an emissions inventory. Many of the cities, many of the countries are able to do this now. But I think we should reflect a bit on this question. Because of the pandemic, this has opened up a lot of information for us. We've all seen how our cities became clear of air pollution. How can you, like, I've seen many photos in social media of a mountain near a city that they're all looking at, praising it as very clear. And we know what happened. There were lockdowns, as we call it, stoppage of factories, stoppage of public transport. And we know that a big chunk of the air pollution problem comes from the industries, or also open burning, agricultural waste burning, but also from diesel-fired or diesel-fueled vehicles. And these are some of the things that we can prioritize. I recently saw an article from the Republic of Korea, again, saying that they are going to ban or to replace all diesel vehicles in the city by 2025. So again, perhaps also influenced by the pandemic, they probably saw that the importance of looking at this significant contributor to the air pollution problem in the city should be addressed first. I think this is all for now, and but would be good to go back to this issue of identifying sources of air pollution and prioritizing them, and probably working with agencies, other government agencies, but also stakeholders to address this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bert. So you put out a list of issues there: industry, vehicle emissions, including diesel, and as well as older polluting combustion engines, open agricultural burning. So a range of things there. Now, obviously, a lot of synergies also with the climate change agenda, because all of those will be releasing carbon dioxide into the air. But the complexity there also with air quality is you have a whole range of other pollutants. Diesel has been listed as a carcinogen. You've got the particulate matter. So there's complexities there that also need to be brought in. But really appreciate that. And I think that is a topic that we'll need to come to more through this knowledge series, really starting to unpack a little bit more what the issues are. And actually, just to give a little bit of a plug as well, ADB's work, we're currently looking at 7 cities to provide support on air quality issues around the world. And one of the things precisely that we're trying to look at is unpacking what are the sources of air quality issues in those cities, so we can work together with the local mayors and governments in developing strategies to address them. So thanks again, Bert. Now, we've heard from WHO, we've heard from Oranges and UN Environment Programme a couple of times. I'd like to now turn over to Dr. Gunbat from the Ministry of Environment in Mongolia. Now, Mongolia, particularly in Ulaanbaatar, but also secondary cities like Erdenet, face major challenges. Ulaanbaatar has some of the worst air quality in the world during the winter months. So we've got a special feature now with Dr. Gunbat to provide a brief presentation, a little bit in terms of the context for Mongolia, but if I can ask you also, to give us your perspectives on the challenges and how you're looking to address them in the Mongolia context. Over to you, Dr. Gunbat.
Thank you, Bruce. Here in this presentation, I will basically cover three topics. First, to provide a brief background on indicators of key air pollutants and sources of air pollution in the context of
Dr. Gamba, sorry to interrupt you just when you're getting started. Just two things. Your line's coming through a little bit choppy, so might be we've seen you just to kick off, but perhaps turn your camera off. It might help with the connection. And then if you could just go to the full screen mode, so everyone in the audience can see your screen, if you're able to do that. Sorry to interrupt.
So in this presentation, I will quickly introduce three topics. The first is providing background on the indicators of key air pollutants and source of air pollution in the context of groundwater. Second, we discuss the main challenges are found, air pollution and finally, I will provide more solve the problems of air pollution in the last couple of years. As you can see,
Dr. Gamba, I'm really sorry, we're just not able to hear you. It's coming through, but very faint. If you're just able to speak a bit louder, get a little bit closer to the microphone, or adjust any of your settings there. Yeah, and then for your screen, you'll see there is a button there just with the image of the video screen. If you click on that, it'll go to the full screen. We'll be able to see the details a little better.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just a bit soft.
Okay, I'll try. Louder. How about the screen? Screen.
Screen, we're still not on the full slideshow, but that's not a big issue. We can still see it. Actually, if you like, for the screen, if you just stop sharing, and Chinky on our side will just share it for you, so we can go to the full screen, and then you can just focus in on doing the speech on the side. That might also help with the volume. So we'll run the presentation on our side.
Okay. So in the slide, you can see the upper side shows the locations of 15 air quality sites in Ulaanbaatar, indicated in the red and blue dots. Below the map, the graph shows the temporal variations of the major pollutants such as SO2, NO2, PM10, and PM2.5. And the red lines indicate the Mongolian national standard, which is the predicted level of the pollutants. So, seeing the graphs, it's obvious that the pollutant concentration exceeds the standard levels for many years. For example, the average concentration of PM2.5 reached 7 times, for example, 4 times high as recommended annual guideline. But in winter seasons, in terms of daily maximum levels, the concentration reached 80 to 100 times higher than recommended. So the next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide is showing the sources of air pollution.
It's on the sources of air pollution. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes.
Okay. This is because the majority of sources of pollution comes from burning raw coal in air areas. Here in this slide, you can see the respective percentages, how pollution sources are distributed. In the city of Ulaanbaatar, there are more than 200,000 households that are not connected to the central heating system, are greatly contributing to the air pollution due to heating needs. To mention, Ulaanbaatar is known as the coldest capital city in the world. Next slide, please. Okay. So according to the latest research and studies, the air pollution has been the main cause of several adverse health effects, including cardiovascular disease, also associated with the maternal health impairments such as pregnancy losses, premature birth, low birth weight, and various birth defects. For instance, warm respiratory disease constituted over 90% of the hospital admission of patients below 19 years old. 80% of the hospital admission of patients with pneumonia is accounted in wintertime, and 53% of those are related to air pollution in combination with the winter harsh weather condition. According to UNICEF report on Mongolia's air pollution increases published in 2018, the study warns that treating children for disease induced by air pollution would lead to increased cost of $9.8 million across 2017 to 2025. These challenges can be from this slide, its respective percentage distribution. Next, let's discuss about what the government of Mongolia did in addressing the air pollution. First of all, I would like to mention that prior to 2017, there was no designated program or unified document on the air pollution reduction measures. In 2017, the National Program on Air and Environmental Pollution was issued by the Mongolian government, which is the first comprehensive policy document aiming to improve air and environmental quality in Mongolia. Next, please. Following the national program, we are in the process of implementing the measures to reduce the air pollution, such as banning of alcohol, subsidizing the nighttime electricity tariff, replacement of heat on the boilers, and so on. Because of time limit, I'll be discussing more details about the key achievements of successful measures. As a result of implemented measures for the last winter, 2019-2020 winter, a significant improvement in air quality in Ulaanbaatar is seen. Here in this slide, you can see the comparative pictures between 2018 and 2019, and some graphs on the left shows the time variation of PM10 and PM2.5, and the shaded area on the upper side show the concentrations of PM for the last winter. So this is my final slide. All I want to say, reducing pollution levels, furthermore, and keeping air quality standard in Ulaanbaatar with an extended process requiring a mix of short and long-term actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gunbud, and I'm glad it did come through much more clearly in the second part. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties, everyone, just in that first part. Very interesting presentation, and we will share those slides as well. For anyone that's interested, we can put those later or email out. I'll check with the team afterwards what we can do there, because I think it's some very interesting data. You know, staggering, of course, that 90% of hospital admissions are related to respiratory illness, and you know, significant correlations with air quality issues there. So, you know, obviously it's a critical issue. But thank you very much for setting out in terms of some of the driving sources and the government's action plan that's being developed there to address air quality. And of course, ADB's been very happy to be a partner, and looking forward to working more with you on that. But it points us in the direction of solutions, which is obviously the big challenge for all of us, given that these issues around air quality are so complex and driven by so many different factors, as we've heard before. So we want to now come to this sort of final round with the panelists to talk about some of the initiatives and options that we can take forward. These will also be things we pick up in later seminars. If I can start again with Dr. Mutsuzi, if you could help us a little bit by understanding some examples of initiatives on improving air quality that you've seen that may have followed a collaborative approach involving different actors, such as environmental regulators, climate change, energy providers examples. These, of course, can be from anywhere across the world that you've had experience in. And then we'll come to other panelists also on solutions-orientated issues. Over to you, Dr. Mattuzzi.
Right, thanks. Yes, I'd like to maybe start from Mongolia, just to emphasize what Dr. Gantuia said. I had the pleasure of being in Ulaanbaatar early this year, just before the COVID started. And indeed, I have to say that the city of Ulaanbaatar, government of Mongolia put together a very integrated type of approach. Something that goes through the essentially energy reform, and different actors sitting around the table have contributed to this step forward. Other examples in Asia, we heard before also a reference to Seoul, which is our host city, and here too there's a very impressive efforts underway. City of Seoul has been investing a lot in recent years. The example was mentioned of the latest regulation on diesel, which indeed will certainly contribute to curb one of the big sources of air pollution. Other big cities in Asia, it's difficult to pick on them, but mega cities, other mega cities like Beijing, I mean, they managed to decrease air pollution, PM pollution, quite substantially over the years through very aggressive measures involving different sectors. So these are good examples, I think, of collaboration at various levels of government, different sectors, in places where indeed the issue is very, very severe. Improvements have been made that have brought a level of pollution from very high to high in some cases, or from high to medium. So it's still a very, very long way to go. And these initiatives really should be, in our view, they should be scaled up and supported in many different ways. I'd also like to mention that, I mean, because in these cities, in these places, air pollution remains quite high, despite some improvements. Also, again, referring to Europe, I would say similar initiatives on integrated approach, especially at city level, have resulted in outstanding results, like in Northern Europe, places like Stockholm or Utrecht in the Netherlands. They are actually those places where that figure in the minority of cities that stay below air pollution and WHO guidelines. And again, this went through integrated action on all the relevant sectors, transport being kind of one of the most prominent one, energy, housing. So these things are very, very different from, not only from one region to another, but also from one country to another. So it's very difficult to make one-size-fits-all type of recipe. And as we mentioned, I mean, the information on source apportionment is really crucial. And on that, it's a challenging issue. I mean, there's big contribution from transboundary air pollution in this region, for example, and that needs to be clarified. So these initiatives should also involve international collaboration. That's where WHO, we're trying to come in the picture as forcefully as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mattuzzi, for that. And couldn't agree more, of course, on the integrated approaches. It's obviously very critical, but also, as you put your finger on, there's no one size fits all. One size fits all. So source apportionment and looking at the strategies for individual cities, it's obviously the way to go. But learning from those success stories in Europe and Asia and across the world. Now, with that in mind, let me pass again to IGES, to Dr. Janadhanan. Obviously, there are trade-offs, and I think from everyone here in the panel, we'd agree that economic growth and environmental protection and health are equally as important and should not be seen as mutually exclusive. So with that in mind, how can we achieve that balance? Are there any recommendations that you might give us in terms of areas where we could balance economic growth while at the same time looking at air quality improvements?
Thank you, Bruce. I mean, definitely that's a subjective question, but being an optimist, I should actually say affirmative. I should answer affirmative. But this is based on what trajectory we opt for, and what do we want to? How do we want to treat our air and environmental resources as we progress on our economic pathway? Let me refer back to the air pollution in Asia and the Pacific report. It's a science-based solutions. This report identifies 25 clean measures that can positively impact human health, crop yields, climate change, and socio-economic development, as well as contribute to achieving the sustainable development goals. So implementing these measures, which is prescribed in this report, could help something like 1 billion people breathe clean air by 2030 and reduce global warming by 1/3 of a degree Celsius by 2050. I believe this report is already shared via the message chat box, and thanks Karma for doing that. Now, these measures are segregated. If you look at read the report, these measures are segregated in different categories. And certain measures are actually categorized under the regional application of conventional measures. And another set of solutions are categorized under next stage air quality measures that are not yet major components of air policies in many parts of Asia and Pacific. And the third category is about measures contributing to development priority goals and benefits for air quality. So these solutions are categorized into these 3 different segments. And these 25 solutions will have, I mean, we may not be able to apply all actually in a particular place, but depending on the kind of problems each society has or country has or geography has, there is a possibility of utilizing these solutions. If you ask me to highlight 3 major recommendations from this report, or probably like 3 major solutions, again, I mentioned these solutions, the requirement of these solutions differ according to the type of air pollution coming from each places and the type of source of pollutants. But general trend, based on a general trend, I can see that there are 3 solutions I would like to highlight here. Is that one of them is about industrial process emission standards. Industry is one of the major emitters in any society. So introduce advanced emission standards in industries. For example, iron and steel plants, cement factories, and glass production and chemical industry, etc. Another solution I would like to highlight here is that the post-combustion controls. Introduce state-of-the-art, end-of-the-pipe measures to reduce sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate emission at power stations and in large-scale industry. Power plants continue to be one of the major sources of air pollution in almost all countries. Then the third one would be to sort of look at the transportation sector, emission standards for road vehicles. We need to strengthen all measures of all emission standards. Special focus should be given on regulation on diesel, light and heavy duty vehicle stations and in large scale industry. So these are actually some of the quick points I would like to highlight, but I would strongly encourage all the audience, members of audience to see the report, and I'm sure that you would actually definitely get quite a lot of interesting points from the policy relevant points. In addition, I would also like to highlight the sort of co-benefits associated with the implementing these 25 solutions. Number one is climate benefit. Carbon dioxide emissions in 2030 could be reduced by almost 20% and methane by 45% by implementing these solutions. So this means this would decrease the expected warming by 1/3 of a degree Celsius by 2050. And the second benefit I would like to highlight here is food security. Ozone-induced crop losses could be reduced considerably by implementing these solutions. Health of natural ecosystems would also improve. And the third benefit I would like to highlight here is about the health benefits. 1 billion people could breathe clean air that meets stringent WHO standards by 2030. So these are actually some of the measures and benefits I would like to highlight here. As I mentioned, I strongly encourage everyone to go through this report if you get a chance. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I really appreciate those points. And again, just to alert everyone, we have put the link to that report in the chat. I definitely encourage everyone to have a look. I was fortunate to be there when it was launched in Bangkok a couple of years ago, and it really is, a useful starting point. Those 25 solutions that can be adapted, and pretty compelling. If we can get 1/3 of a degree C reductions while also helping 1 billion people with their health at the same time, that's got to be pretty compelling for action. I also appreciate your thoughts on the industry post-combustion and vehicle standards, obviously quite critical for moving forward with this. Just to note something that we've been involved in working with the People's Republic in China in the Greater Beijing area around air quality, certainly been looking at those emission standards. But also in terms of investments, then helping industry to invest and provide finance that can help them meet those standards, because that's the other critical thing to get that work done. So I really appreciate that. I'd now like to turn again to Bert from UNEP. Now, Bert, we're seeing, of course, a lot of investment now, economic stimulus going into restart economies that are increasingly opening up after COVID-19, or while we still grapple with the pandemic. So of course that needs to be managed in a way. A green recovery is obviously going to be critical so that we don't go backwards through those stimulus. But also, it's not just about governments; it's about the private sector. And I wanted to ask you there: do you have any views in terms of how we can, or how we are able to get the private sector involved in addressing air quality issues? Over to you, Bert. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. I think in terms of messaging, the UN various agencies is consistent, and all of the agencies are trying to say and work with governments to build back better. The Secretary General is consistent as well when his message, even for this International Clean Air for Blue Sky, says, let's end subsidies to fossil fuels, let's shift to clean energy and sustainable transport. Sometimes I guess that's easy to say, and but difficult to implement, of course. With respect to the and echoing what Dr. Nanda, it's important for them to know the standards. And I see we have a lot of representatives from governments, national governments, but also cities. We hope, or we should work with the various governments to make sure that the standards are in place. And not only standards, but there is a roadmap for progressive standards. I think maybe I should highlight the case of Thailand, especially since I am based here in Bangkok. I've always liked Thailand as an example for air quality management. They were one of the earliest adopters of Euro 4 vehicle emission standards in Southeast Asia, I think as far back as 2010. But over the years, no progressive standards were set in place. At the same time, the GDP of Thailand is booming or is increasing with a lot of industries. So there was, at least in this case of Thailand, rising vehicle numbers, motorization, a lot of diesel vehicles. At the same time, the industry, the agricultural business is very high. And we saw, yeah, this is outside Bangkok in the northern area, agricultural waste burning is heavily practiced. And as we saw, or as we see, air pollution is back in Bangkok, and it's very bad. And you can see it, you can hear it. Sorry, you can hear it, you can smell it, you can taste it. That's how it is during this time, every January to March every year. This is the cooler time. The government knows about it, and the government is working, leading efforts, and now also together with the private sector. They have come up with a good list of what can be done, what should be done. But like what I said earlier, sometimes it's easy to say that, okay, we have standards, we have the technologies in place, and let's do it. But if you see along the roads here, there are still a lot of diesel vehicles that are smoke belching. You can still see a lot of private sector burning agricultural waste. What I'm trying to say here is we know the sources of air pollution. We know that there are solutions, but we have to work with the sector. That's why I was going to say that in the future, and maybe for ADB, we should be sector specific. We know that these are the main sources of air pollution in Thailand or in Bangkok metropolitan area. Let's work with the transport sector. Let's work with the agriculture sector to see what kind of measures should be put in place. And let's focus our attention to that. Let's, in terms of investments. In Mongolia, you've seen the data shown by Dr. Garbayat, 80% from household burning of raw coal. So I think this is a starting point where we should engage with the private sector, but also of civil society. But maybe last point on the private sector. When we work with the private sector, at least from my experience, there should be a balance where we try to put in more advanced technologies, more stricter standards in place. There will always be that fight for standards to be delayed, for adoption of better technology to be delayed. And we have to find that compromise. And I think this is where governments, national governments, city governments can come in, probably also together with multinational development banks and other banks for that matter who has financing. So a key issue for me is the financing, how to address this issue of supporting the specific sector to reduce their emissions. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Bert. Your great points, and I'm seeing also, questions in the chat box around the role of other actors, including the private sector or those outside of government. We might come to those in a few minutes, so thank you. Now our time's running, so we'll now come to last question to Dr. Ganbat from Mongolia, and then we'll open up to address some of these initial questions that we've got coming through the chat. Dr. Ganbat, now of course you're struggling with these issues in Mongolia and the government is implementing actions already. What do you see as the actions that are promising or showing some early signs of success?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned in the presentation, the biggest source of air pollution is from area where the households burn wood and coal for their heating and cooking purpose. For Mongolia, based on the experience and efforts taken previously, I would like to highlight that the most important or most successful policy measures was the banning of raw coal and its subsequent the measures that are implemented all together. Upon the governmental resolution number 62 in 2018, the consumption of roll call in 6 central districts in Ulaanbaatar is banned starting from 15th May 2019. Meantime, the government prepared ensuring the sustainable supply of briquette fuel, upgraded briquette fuel to replace the raw coal in households in Ulaanbaatar. And the state-owned Toronto Metals factory has been established a year before that, and started to stock briquette fuel to distribute to households in Ulaanbaatar starting autumn 2019 before the winter starts. And in addition, I must say that the price of briquette fuel is subsidized by the government to make sure that the price is affordable for the low-income families living in their area. So all these the measures all together with the combination of bottom-up approach were the key factors to become successful in the context of Ulaanbaatar. This means that the production, storage, distribution, and the selling all together organized at the grassroots level, ranging from citizen to district, community, with active involvement of all stakeholders in all levels. In addition to banning the consumption of raw coal, the progress has been made through legislation. The law on air sets out several important measures. For example, they subsidizing the nighttime electricity tariff in households for the heating purpose. So finally, I would like to mention that the progress, significant progress is seen from 2019-2020 winter. For example, the PM2.5 concentration is reduced by 43% for the last winter in comparison to the 2016 winter, and also PM10 concentration is reduced by 39%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambat. So, yeah, some really important points there in terms of the Mongolia experience. And then just to pick up one of them, obviously, the solutions need to be tailored to what can be implemented and the cost considerations and whether or not they're affordable, including to households that maybe need to make transitions to different types of fuel or cooking stoves. Very important. Called Vinh Phuc in Vietnam, and it's surrounded by that was agricultural fields, and every year the burning would basically take air pollutants into the city of Hanoi, and that was very much an urban city relationship issue there. So I might ask Bert if you're able to just comment on this one, because you started to pick up a little bit on these issues earlier. You know, how do we deal with that? You know, one, there's the issue of agricultural burning, but also how do we bring, you know, these institutional issues, city, urban barriers, how do you start to work together across those divides?
I think speaking from the experience in Thailand, where we are closely coordinating with the Pollution Control Department, it is led by the national government. Or I guess in this case, I should say that we need the national government to step in and coordinate this role. But also we need the private sector operating these sectors. And another key element is the civil society. There is a big movement now, I should say, here in Thailand called Thailand Clean Air Network, and they are heavily pressing this issue to government. Very aggressive, a bit activist, I should say, but I think that's the right way, because you need to bang the doors of the government, but also the private sector, and to see how you can work together. So yeah, maybe in summary, we need the national government to step in because of these barriers, or it's more than the city, and also the role of the private sector and also civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bert. And of course, as you allude to there, also that multi-stakeholder working across boundaries approach is quite critical. I see also there's a question in the chat from Glinda Batan from Clean Air Asia, talking about the need for evidence-based multi-stakeholder action plans. Maybe we can come to that as well. But I think that obviously needs to take into those issues across boundaries. I want to come though to a couple of earlier questions that came in to the chat. We had one from Ricky Barber, who's staff at ABB, and also another question there related to the education sector. Maybe I'll just roll those into one there. So the issues around, in governments, and as we've heard, governments in many cases may be challenged with capacity or have many issues that need to be addressed, and may not always be able to respond in a timely way with action plans or getting legislation in place. Sometimes legislation also gets caught up in the courts, like we've seen in India around improving emission standards. So, with that as a context, what can other actors be doing? From the private sector, we've talked a little bit already, but other agencies, for example, research institutions, the education sector, NGOs. If I might turn to Dr. Nanda from IGES to have a couple of comments on this one.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks a lot for the audience to raise a question, for raising the question. These are very important questions, interesting points. I'm not sure my answer would be sufficient enough to address those, but let me try that. One of the points I could actually see in the question is about the role of different institutions. I strongly believe that air pollution cannot be addressed by a single institution. Every institution is important. The domestic institutions, government, local governments to national governments, as well as private sector and educational systems, educational institutions and all. So there needs to be an ecosystem of information sharing should be developed by a network of all these institutions. This is actually something which I mentioned earlier in my presentation. And there needs to be a lot of importance attributed to the capacity development programs. And we actually need to, in some of our work, we have witnessed that there have been, we have made several attempts for capacity development programs in certain places in South Asian countries. And we still note that even after doing one or two capacity development programs with the same participants, we find they're unable to capture many of those things, or they're unable to actually spend time learning that. So this is not to blame those stakeholders, but the kind of importance attributed by the system on air pollution issues is one of the most critical fault here. So I believe there's an opportunity for national governments as well as all the stakeholders in attributing air pollution issue as not something that is going to affect today, but it is a long-term issue. And so we need to actually address that on an urgent basis. The second point I would like to highlight here is that technology can play a very big role. And countries where domestic technologies are not sufficient enough to make breakthrough changes, we need to think of collaboration with countries with advanced technology. For example, Japanese government has been leading quite a lot of technology initiatives through programs called a joint crediting mechanism, where the government do give subsidies for providing technologies. So there needs to be some sort of an arrangement between the host countries and countries with the advanced technologies for utilizing or basically making better use of advanced technologies in solutions. So in essence, I would like to say that air pollution, addressing air pollution is not the responsibility or not the burden of one of the institutions, but it is actually the responsibility of every institution and every stakeholder in the society. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again. Yeah, so clearly this multi-sector, multi-stakeholder approach keeps coming up again. Shared responsibilities. This is something that we're all impacted by. I want to use this a little bit as a segue to the question again from Glinda from Clean Air Asia, where she says, in cities and peri-urban areas, there are many solutions of pollution that need to be addressed. But what role, if any, does evidence-based multi-stakeholder clean air action plans development and implementation play? Now, this is a question that different panelists might have an opinion on, but maybe I can just start with Dr. Matuzi. You talked earlier about city strategies and city planning and the experience in Europe also on this. Is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of these action plans that need to be brought together and how we might do that?
Yes, I think it's a good question. Of course, sitting in WHO, we think that the underlying evidence, especially on health effects, but not only health effects. I mean, there are many other consequences of pollution. In any case, the evidence on the health impacts is really instrumental to make further pressure on the various levels that we are mentioning that should be involved in this discussion and in this response. Numbers are very powerful arguments to stimulate discussion and response. I would also go back, I'd like to go back a second to the issue of education, which I think is crucial, and indeed I think there's a deficit in that respect. I would also, I mean, air pollution, when it comes to education and sort of the widespread awareness of the problem, I think it's best embedded in a broader discussion of sustainability. Air pollution is one of the many phases of climate change, for example. And I've recently led a survey, read about a survey that points out the fact that 1/4 or 1/5 of global population has not heard of climate change. So, I mean, that's something that really the education sector needs to do something about, and to ensure that the profile of these issues that are so urgent and so critical is raised and reaches everyone. Now, the good thing, air pollution is a strong argument because of this strong evidence behind. As I mentioned earlier, it's the strongest chapter in this respect in environment and health, and it can really facilitate and stimulate more discussion on sustainability and climate change at large. So by all means, I think it's an essential ingredient to this kind of debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matuzi, and yeah, absolutely. And I think putting this, data and information into action is the most critical thing, and building awareness and education will be absolutely crucial there. So thank you to our panelists. Now, we're going to have to start to wrap up now, and I apologize we've not been able to get to all the questions in the chat. There are still some important ones there that we won't be able to address today, such as looking at forest fires, which was raised by Dr. Regina, in terms of being a transboundary issue that needs to be addressed. And clearly, we've seen that in Asia year and year again. as something that we need to also look at. So we've got transboundary dimensions as well, not just within cities, and a range of other questions we won't be able to cover now. But thank you to everyone. I want to just give, very briefly, maybe just here 30 seconds to each of our panelists. If you've got, one key message that you want to deliver as a last wrap up, and then I'll say a few words to just bring us to a close. Dr. Marco, you're still there on camera. Maybe I can just turn to you for any final conclusions.
Well, it's difficult. Let me touch on so many points. I'd like to mention the fact that, we should really value the progress that has been made in parts of the world. In some cases, as I mentioned earlier, it's very, very uphill struggle. But in a sense, it's even more valuable, isn't it, when you move from a acute situation to a subacute situation. So, because, there's a lot of negative. Lots of people say, well, it's all very well, but air pollution is still high. In many cases, it's the case. Air pollution is still high, but it's not as high as it was before. And I think, indeed, it has to go down further, but it's certainly a valuable effort. Air pollution goes down.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate that. Let's continue with the other panelists. So I'll go in turn, just in the speaking order we've had. So to Aijaz, Dr. Nanda.
Thank you, Bruce. First of all, thank you for this initiative, and this also gives me an opportunity to raise this one point which I think could be important for the bank to look at. Now, I believe this COVID-19 presents enormous opportunities to learn about critical areas that can help in addressing air pollution. So I believe ADB has got sufficient expertise. It is one of the leading organizations in support, and I believe ADB can actually use this data, which is going to be extremely useful for ADB in deciding its direction for financial support, and also in designing the gravity of support to specific areas and issues related to air pollution. So I hope the bank will have an opportunity to look at it. And let me thank Bruce, Susanto, and Karma and Bulgan for organizing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nanda. Really appreciate that. And you highlighting also the role of finance and the role that organizations like ADB can play. This is, obviously very crucial in turning these solutions, like the 25 solutions you've worked on, into a reality. So thank you. Now, Bert Fabian from UN Environment.
I guess I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you as well, Bruce, and to ADB, our panelists. But I think the message is we have the solutions. We kept referring to the 25 solutions. The solutions are there. The experience is there. We need to pull it together in terms of in the country, in the cities. Definitely, we need multi-stakeholder coordination and cooperation. We need to keep up the pressure from the civil society to the government, where capacity does not exist. And I realize that there are, in many cases, national government capacity is very limited. This is where we should tap to work with research institutions, both local and international, and to see how we can not just only come up with the plans. I think we should really start now to go beyond the plans. I started my career in ADB 20 years ago. Topic was air pollution, transport and air pollution. And 20 years now, or now, I'm still working on the same topic. I hope 20 years in the future, I am in a different sector and we have addressed air pollution. Happy International Day for Clean Air for Blue Skies to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bert. Great point. I agree with you. I hope this is one that we can make, collective and solid action on quickly, and we're not still talking about it in 20 years. Actually, Vice President Susanto, when we were briefing him on the preparation for this event, raised something very similar. So it's something, obviously, the profile has to come up. Thank you. So finally, Dr. Gumbat from Mongolia. Really appreciate your input. You have the last word from the panel.
Thank you for organizing this important event and the opportunity for Mongolia to introduce the recent efforts and some success seen in Rama from Mongolia. I hope to see you on further collaboration on clean air. Thank you very much for ATB organizing this the event and organizers again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambad. And again, let me express my great appreciation for all of our 4 panelists together from the WHO, IGES, UN Environment Programme and Mongolia. We're working with all of you on different fronts related to air quality, health, climate change, environment issues, and we're very keen to continue that partnership around these issues. Now, I think all of you have given great wrap-up and summary, so not too much more that I'll add to this in closing, but I really want to thank everyone for joining, including all of our participants today. Obviously, air quality is a very complex and long-term issue that we've been battling against, as Bert had said. For 20 years now, it's on the agenda, but hasn't got the traction for a number of reasons. It's many sources, multi-sector, urban and rural, transboundary, many different dimensions that we need to work on supporting policy reforms and standards. We've got solutions to this, as we've heard from panelists. We need to focus those, though, on specific cities and develop very clear action plans for those cities, because the issues are going to be different in each particular case. So, clean air action plans for individual cities, as Glenda had also suggested, so that we can make more specific interventions a reality. Capacity building is going to be obviously crucial there, as is bringing the data together to convince decision makers, but also finance, and that's an area where ADB is very interested to take forward. For example, if we bring standards, how does industry and the private sector meet those standards? Or if we need to have better cooking stoves to address indoor air quality, how do local communities afford those? So that they don't just remain nice ideas on the shelf, but can actually be put into practice. Technology transfer also is a critical part of that. So, we need to move forward on this. Air quality is more on the agenda, I think, at the moment because of respiratory illness and COVID-19. So this is something we have to capture, and we really have to move on this. Air quality affects all of us, and it's affecting our economy. And it's affecting, as Vice President Susan Turner said at the very beginning, quality of life. We have to do something about it, and we're very committed at ADB, and we'd like to scale up a program. We'd be very happy to reach out and work more with all of you, our speakers and also our guests today. So with that, let me really thank everyone again. And for today's session, it's been the first kicking off this inaugural International Day for Clean Air and Blue Skies, but also kicking off an ADB Knowledge series on this. So please do stay tuned for future sessions, and have a look also in the chat for some of the information that we've shared, including we'll be putting the links there to presentations. In fact, actually, I see my colleague has already put the link up through our Development Asia page. So see that for further information. So thanks again, and have a great day, and I hope the clear skies can shine on all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, and all your colleagues. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.